Do you think being good makes you safe? That's exactly why you're controlled. You were taught that being nice gets you love, that saying yes gets you acceptance, that lowering your voice, your needs, your opinions somehow makes you more worthy. But here's the truth no one told you. That habit of being agreeable, of being good, of trying to please, it's the reason you feel used, overlooked, disrespected, not because you're not enough, but because you've become too easy to read, too easy to access, too easy to predict. And predictable people are easy to manipulate. You might think you're being kind, but what if that kindness is just a mask, a survival strategy you've perfected since childhood, a way to avoid rejection, to keep peace, to feel safe? Because somewhere along the way, you learned that when you speak your truth, people leave, so you stopped speaking. When you ask for what you want, you're called demanding, so you stopped asking. When you show your edge, you're too much, so you dulled yourself down. But here's the paradox. The more you shrink, the more the world takes. The more polite you become, the more invisible you feel. Until one day, you realize you've been living in a world that rewards masks, not authenticity. Niccolò Machiavelli saw through this centuries ago. In a world obsessed with virtue, he wrote, people should either be treated kindly or crushed. Anything in between creates rebellion. In other words, if you're not respected, you'll be used. And if you're only liked, you'll never be feared. And yes, I know, that word feared sounds harsh. But Machiavelli wasn't talking about violence. He was talking about power, about presence, about boundaries that are unspoken but felt. You don't need to raise your voice to be powerful. You need to stop begging to be seen. Being good without discernment is not virtue. It's vulnerability. It's giving people a map to your softness and acting surprised when they step on it. You walk into rooms and wonder why people talk over you, why they expect you to say yes, why they never consider your silence as a no. It's because they've learned your script, and you've never changed it. But what if you did? What if your silence became unreadable? What if your kindness had a limit? What if your energy didn't rush to fix, to please, to explain? People treat you based on the emotional contracts you sign often unconsciously. And being overly nice is a contract written in invisible ink that says, you can cross me. I won't stop you. I'll understand. I'll explain it away. So ask yourself, how many times have you been hurt, not by what someone did, but by what you allowed in the name of being good? This isn't an invitation to become cold. It's an invitation to become clear. Machiavelli understood this. Those who are feared are not always loved, but they are rarely disrespected. And the real danger isn't in losing love. It's in losing yourself in the pursuit of it. Because what use is being loved if you're only loved for a version of you that doesn't exist? So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt used without knowing who gave them permission? Maybe now you know. It was never them. It was you. And it's okay, because awareness is the first power. And power, real power, begins the moment you stop needing to be seen as good and start choosing to be seen as real. The loudest ones are often the weakest. Think about it. The ones who overshare, over-explain, overcompensate. The ones who constantly need to be seen, to be validated, to be approved. They flood the space with noise, hoping the volume will cover their vulnerability. But real power moves in silence. It enters the room without asking for attention, and yet everyone feels it. You've seen it before. That person who barely speaks, yet somehow shifts the atmosphere. They don't dominate the conversation. They don't rush to make a point. But their presence makes others pause. There's something unreadable about them. Something steady. Something untouchable. And that mystery, that quiet control, that is power. Machiavelli knew this well. In a world obsessed with visibility, he understood the strategic value of withdrawal. Appear as little as possible, he implied. Control not through presence, but through absence. Because when you're constantly available, constantly reactive, constantly explaining yourself, you give others the blueprint to your behavior. And people can only manipulate what they understand. But when you step back, when you don't always respond, when your silence becomes your strategy, suddenly, they don't know how to reach you. They don't know what you're thinking. And that uncertainty becomes influence. Let's be honest. Most people aren't afraid of what they know. They're afraid of what they can't predict. And that fear, that curiosity, it becomes your leverage. Now ask yourself, are you always available? Do you always answer right away? Do you feel the need to make yourself understood in every room? If so, you're giving away more than your time. You're giving away your mystery, your unpredictability, your edge. The most dangerous person in the room is not the one speaking. It's the one observing, the one who doesn't rush to fill the silence, the one who is aware without needing to prove it. Because presence isn't about being seen, it's about being felt. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think influence comes from charisma, from charm, from being liked. But Machiavelli would disagree. He believed that the most effective rulers weren't the ones loved by all. They were the ones whose presence commanded attention, even in absence, who could disappear from a room and still be talked about long after they were gone. It's not about disappearing forever. It's about being intentional with your energy, with your availability, with your reactions. When you no longer give people immediate access to your emotions, you shift the dynamic. You stop dancing for connection, and you start commanding respect. So what if you pulled back just a little? What if you allowed people to wonder? What if your silence became the space where they reveal themselves? Most people are trying so hard to be seen that they forget the real leverage is in what remains unseen. You don't owe the world your transparency. You owe yourself your power. So here's the mirror. Are you showing too much? Saying too much? Giving too much of yourself too freely? Maybe it's time to become less obvious, more deliberate. Maybe it's time to let your silence speak louder than your voice. Because when you master the art of subtlety, of absence, of stillness, you no longer chase influence. You become it. You've learned to please to avoid pain. Not because you're weak, but because once, maybe many times, your truth was punished. Your needs were ignored. Your boundaries were dismissed. So you adapted. You smiled when you were hurting. You stayed silent when you wanted to scream. You said yes when everything inside you whispered no. And they called you kind. They called you easy to love. But it wasn't love. It was survival. This version of you, the one who gives, bends, adjusts, please, it's not born of virtue. It's born of fear. You see, kindness is often mistaken for morality, but in reality, for many, it's a mask. A beautifully crafted mask built in childhood, reinforced in relationships, and celebrated by a society that rewards compliance. Because a kind person is easy to control, easy to guilt, easy to blame. You were never taught to be powerful. You were taught to be agreeable. Because agreeable people don't cause problems. They don't resist. They don't threaten the system. They absorb it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If your kindness is rooted in fear, it isn't kindness. It's self-protection. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He didn't romanticize virtue. He exposed it. He stripped it of its illusions and called it what it often is, a tool. He wrote, "A man who wishes to make a vocation of being good at all times will come to ruin among so many who are not good." In other words, Goodness, when not backed by strength, becomes naivety, and naive people become victims. To Machiavelli, morality wasn't sacred, it was strategic, a method of influence, not an end in itself. He wasn't saying you shouldn't be good. He was saying that being good should never be your only strategy. Because in a world where others lie, cheat, and manipulate, your honesty becomes a weakness unless you know when and how to use it. This challenges everything you were taught. But maybe that's the point, because deep down, you already know. There have been moments when your kindness was used against you, when your forgiveness became a free pass, when your patience became a reason for others to keep delaying their change, and you kept calling it love, but it was self-betrayal. You were conditioned to think that if you're just good enough, they won't leave. If you're just patient enough, they'll finally see your worth. If you're just kind enough, they'll stop hurting you. But they didn't, and they won't. Because what they see isn't kindness. They see permission. Being good without power makes you a tool. Read that again. Because tools are used and discarded. That's not what you were born to be. So here's the question. What would happen if you stopped trying to be the good one? If you stopped softening your truth so others feel comfortable? If you stopped earning love through sacrifice, you might lose a few people. You might unsettle the room, but you would gain something more valuable than approval. You would gain yourself. Because real kindness isn't about making others feel safe at your expense. It's about choosing integrity over image, boundaries over comfort, truth over peace. There's a version of you waiting on the other side of this awareness. A version that doesn't need to be liked to feel worthy. That doesn't apologize for existing. That doesn't confuse silence with maturity or people-pleasing with goodness. And yes, she will be misunderstood. She will be called difficult, cold, unreasonable, but she will be free. So start asking yourself, in every situation, is this kindness or is this fear dressed in virtue? Because once you know the difference, you stop being controlled by the need to be liked, and you start stepping into a different kind of presence, the kind that is both kind and powerful, quiet and unmovable, compassionate and discerning. Machiavelli would call that the rarest kind of leader, and maybe that's exactly who you were meant to be. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is disappear. Not physically, emotionally. It's what I call emotional disappearance. The decision to stop reacting, to stop explaining, to stop trying to make others understand your worth, to no longer rush to fix things that aren't yours to repair. It's not silence from pain. It's silence from clarity. You've been conditioned to think your value lies in how responsive you are. That answering right away, apologizing first, proving your intentions somehow makes you a better person. But what if that urgency is actually keeping you small? What if your constant availability is what's draining you? There's a strange shift that happens when you stop responding. At first, people get confused, then uncomfortable, and eventually they start chasing, not because they care more, but because the game changed. You're no longer predictable, no longer accessible, and in that space of silence, they start to feel their own noise. You become the mirror. Machiavelli understood this principle long before psychology gave it a name. He knew that direct confrontation wasn't always the most strategic move. Sometimes retreat is the most dangerous move, he warned. Not because you've given up, but because in pulling back, you make others confront the space you once filled. That absence speaks louder than presence. It forces people to ask questions they never bothered to ask when you were always there, always giving, always smoothing things over. Silence, when intentional, is not avoidance. It's positioning. Think of the moments when someone hurts you, And instead of reacting, you chose stillness. No argument, no explanation, just distance. And suddenly, they didn't know what to do with you. The same words that once triggered you no longer moved you. The same patterns that used to control you collapsed in your absence. Because emotional disappearance breaks the script. It removes the reaction they've come to expect and with it, their control. When you stop being emotionally accessible to chaos, the chaos starts to collapse. But this isn't about ghosting. It's about elevation. It's about choosing to conserve your energy instead of wasting it on proving, persuading, or performing. Because the truth is, not everyone deserves an explanation. Not every misunderstanding needs a defense. And not every attack is worth a counter. Your silence, when grounded in self-respect, becomes a shield, a strategy, a statement. Machiavelli would call this the art of calculated withdrawal. Not a surrender, but a setup, a way to shift the battlefield on your terms. When others act on impulse, you act with intention. And that makes you untouchable. Have you ever tried silence as a weapon? Not in anger, but in wisdom. The kind of silence that says, I see what you're doing. I see who you are. And I choose not to participate. That silence creates a boundary louder than any argument. Because when you stop explaining your value, the ones who only valued your performance start to fade. The noise clears, the room rearranges, and what's left are the people who see you without needing to be convinced. So the next time you feel that pull to explain yourself, to defend your choices, to respond immediately, pause. Ask yourself, what would happen if I did nothing? Sometimes nothing changes everything. The world doesn't need another person shouting to be heard. It needs more people who understand the gravity of their silence. Be that gravity. Let your stillness move the room. Let your retreat become the moment others realize they never truly understood your presence. Because when you master emotional disappearance, you don't lose power. You reclaim it. Real influence doesn't come from charm. It doesn't come from how loud you speak or how passionately you argue. It comes from emotional stability, from the quiet steadiness that others feel but can't quite explain. That's what makes people follow. That's what makes them listen. Because when you're grounded, they have nothing to push against. You're not rattled. You're not defensive. You're not leaking energy to prove a point. And that unnerves people more than any threat ever could. We're taught to equate power with passion, to believe that the most influential person in the room is the one who's speaking the most, moving the most, doing the most. But watch closely. That's rarely the one people truly follow. The real leaders, the ones who shift dynamics and command presence, often say the least. They don't explain themselves. They don't justify every move. They simply are. And that unshakable presence, that calm authority, becomes impossible to ignore. Machiavelli said, "It's better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." And while the word feared may sound harsh, what he meant wasn't terror. He meant respect, gravity, the kind of presence that makes others think twice before crossing you. Not because you threaten them, but because you don't need them. You don't need approval. You don't need attention. You don't need to be liked to stay centered. That kind of influence is built from within. And here's the paradox. The more you chase connection through warmth and enthusiasm, the more people see you as someone who needs something from them. And people sense that. The energy of needing approval is loud then if your words are soft. It creates an imbalance, a silent contract where they have power over your self-worth. And when someone feels they have that power, they stop respecting you. But when you enter a room with calm awareness, when your mood isn't swayed by who notices you or who doesn't you become the axis, the silent reference point others start to orbit around. You don't need to take space. Space starts to shape around you. Think of the last time you were with someone who never raised their voice, yet everything they said held weight. They didn't chase reactions. They didn't fill silence. And somehow they held more authority than anyone else in the room. That's what it means to influence without effort. Because influence isn't about performance. It's about presence. A presence that comes from self-respect, from boundaries, from knowing you can walk away at any moment and still be whole. The truth is, most people are leaking energy constantly, through over-explaining, through emotional reactions, through trying to be understood. And each time they trade presence for validation. So ask yourself this: how do you enter a room without losing energy? Do you shrink, hoping not to offend? Do you expand, trying to be liked? Or do you simply arrive, unshaken, with nothing to prove? That's the shift. From performance to presence. From being emotionally reactive to becoming emotionally sovereign. And when you make that shift, everything changes. Because people can sense when someone doesn't need them but chooses to engage anyway. That energy, that's magnetic, that's unforgettable. You don't need to control the room. You just need to control your center. And from there, the room will begin to shift around you. That is the anatomy of true influence. Quiet, steady, undeniable. There comes a moment when something shifts. When you stop asking what's wrong with you and start asking why they felt entitled to your energy in the first place. When you stop trying to be understood and start observing who never tried to understand you, that's when the game changes. Not just in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. This is the turning point. From the one who was once easily read, easily moved, easily accessed to, the one who becomes untouchable, not distant, not cold, just sovereign, grounded, whole. You no longer offer explanations to those who never deserved your story. You no longer defend your kindness to people who confused it with weakness. And you certainly no longer perform your worth hoping someone will finally see it. Because now, you do. And that changes everything. There is a different kind of power in stillness. A different kind of magnetism in restraint. You don't have to announce your growth. You don't have to prove your change. People will feel it. And the ones who once manipulated you will become uncomfortable in your presence, because you're unkind, but because they can no longer access you in the ways they once did. They'll feel the shift, the silence, the space, and they won't know what to do with it. You've become a presence no one can define, yet no one can ignore. This is not about becoming untouchable to others. It's about becoming untouched by their games. You feel the same emotions, but they don't move you the same way. You see the same patterns, but you no longer step into them. You no longer play roles just to make others comfortable. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be real. Machiavelli understood this form of presence. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that shifts dynamics without a word. Influence without noise. Command without control. It's the power of self-containment. The rare energy of someone who doesn't seek, doesn't chase, doesn't beget, never goes unnoticed. Because when you reclaim your energy, people begin to notice how much they relied on it. The ones who used your kindness, your silence, your emotional labor, your over-availability, they begin to unravel, and you no longer feel guilty watching them do so. You've seen too much. You've felt too much. You've lost yourself too many times to go back now. This is your return to your clarity, to your boundary, to your power that no longer leaks but radiates. From the outside, you haven't changed much, but internally, the shift is undeniable. You're no longer waiting for someone to choose you. You've chosen yourself. You've chosen your peace over their chaos, your presence over their approval, and now you move differently. People won't always understand it. They may call you distant, changed, even difficult. But don't shrink. Don't explain. Don't soften the edges you earned through years of breaking and rebuilding. Let them adjust, because the truth is, the version of you that they once handled no longer exists. And what stands now is someone who doesn't react on command, who doesn't negotiate her truth, who no longer hides behind kindness to avoid conflict. You are no longer here to be consumed. You're here to be remembered. So if this video made you feel something shift, leave a trace below. Comment what part hit you. This is not the end. It's your beginning.